Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Glav, Executive Director of the Flint Institute of Arts, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Sheppy Dog Fund Lecture. Tonight, we have Dr. Taylor Hagood with us to present the greatest show on paper and stone, Carnival and Circus Lithography, 1880 to 1940. The Sheppy Dog Fund Lecture Series was established in 2012 by Dr. Alan Klein to address the topics of art, religion, and history prior to the 19th century. Wait a minute. I think your talk is a little bit into the 19th century and 20th century. Are you okay with that, Dr. Klein? Yeah, he's okay. All right. Just checking. We were going to tell you to go home. We wouldn't do that. The Sheppy Dog, as I mentioned, to highlight topics of art, religion, and history, and those of you who have come to the Sheppy Dog Fund Lectures, you know how interesting they are. Thank you, Alan. He's here tonight for continuing to bring these wonderful lectures to the FIA. I would like to remind you that the next Sheppy Dog Fund Lecture will be Wednesday, December 6th with Dr. Michael Pitlick, who will present on the Holy Sepulchre. So that should be a very interesting talk. Please mark your calendars. Before we bring tonight's guest, Dr. Hagood, to the stage, I would like to also remind you that we are open late tonight till 8 p.m., and we're also open every Thursday to 8 p.m., including our cafe and shop. We like to take the opportunity to thank the citizens of Genesee County for the Genesee County Arts, Education, and Cultural Enrichment Millage, which provides free entry to the FIA to Genesee County citizens. And I would like to thank the Ford Foundation Equity Fund of the Community Foundation of Greater Flint for making the ASL interpretation possible. Thank you. Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices, which also includes your watch if you have one of these. Sometimes I forget. Dr. Hagood is currently Professor of American Literature at Florida Atlantic University, and he lectures on literature, art, history, travel, music, and the history of magic. And this is not his first time speaking at the FI, but it's first time here because he gave two previous Sheppy Dog Fund lectures virtually, one during COVID and one shortly after that. So if you missed any of those talks, you did one on Houdini, and then the other one was Baroque art. You can check it out on our YouTube channel where all of our Sheppy Dog Fund lectures live. So you can check out all the past Sheppy Dog Fund lectures. Back to Dr. Hagood, his publications include the C. Hugh Holman Award-winning Faulkner Writer of Disability and Secrecy, Magic, and the One-Act Plays of Harlem Renaissance Women Writers. Everyone, please join me in a warm Flint welcome for Dr. Taylor Hagood.
Thank you very, very much, Tracy. We're going to let Craig get these lights on here. Oh, thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much, Tracy, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I must tell you that this is indeed my third time to be spending time with you, but this is the first time that I've done it in person. So you all are even prettier in person than you were online. I couldn't even see most of you, so it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. And it's I must tell you that I have had I'm so grateful for the hospitality of this facility and this city and you. And I have had the great pleasure and honor of knowing Alan Klein for a little while now. He spends a good bit of his time, I guess, now in the part of the world where I live, which is Florida. By the way, I should say that I appreciate, ma'am, your being interpreter here, and I don't want to pose too many challenges. I should probably get it out of the way right from the beginning that even though I live in West Palm Beach, Florida now, I'm originally from the state of Mississippi. And I know that you have never seen anyone like me before because They do not let us out of the state very often. But I'm here, so hopefully this will all go pretty well. But anyway, I want to say absolutely I'm a huge fan of Alan Klein's, and he is just such a wonderful and fascinating person, and I just so happy that I am able to know him, and this has all worked out. And I want to say also thank you to Tracy. It's the first time to meet her in person. What a lovely and wonderful person. Catherine. Charbal, got to have lunch with her today. I don't know if she's here somewhere, but it was great to get to know her. And everybody, Rachel, the curator, was great. And I hope I say her name right, Mayoma. And everybody, I've met so many wonderful people here. And I got to say a big thank you to Craig, who is the man who does the sound and lights here, does a great job. I walked in, everything was set up. He's great. So I want to say thank you to him. It's a beautiful facility here. If you want to give him a hand, that's okay. Yeah. So, and to everybody here. So I am so excited to get to do this. I did speak on Houdini the first time. We are into the 19th and 20th century here. I sort of forgot about that little detail. So we're doing that, so yeah, hopefully I won't have to go home. But I do want to get on into it. As you may note from the graphics here, I decided just to lean in to the gaudiness of the circus here. So I'm not always this gaudy, but when I am, we're talking about the circus and the carnival and that particular advertising. And I do want to let you know about some of my background here. And if you were tuned in to the Houdini talk we did a little while ago, a couple of years ago, I did grow up in a household with a lot of magic. My father is a magician, and throughout my life, I've been around that, and particularly the kind of stone lithographs that we're talking about tonight. But without saying too much more about it, I want to go into this because we have only 7 hours tonight. So. Also, you have to listen very closely because there is an exam at the end. But anyway, I'm calling it the greatest show on paper and stone because I'm wanting to focus particularly on stone lithographs, and I do hope you can see me okay. Stone lithographs, especially, of course, the idea of lithography is quite, there's quite a lot involved in it, the idea of poster making. And by the way, this facility, it's not only a museum, an art institute. Not only does it have a gallery and a museum, but it also has studios here. So part of the studio work that is here includes lithography. So if you're interested in some of these things, I'm sure there are classes on this. Of course, there are woodcuts and there are linoleum carvings for different kinds of things, but this stone lithography is what I want us to focus on. So with that, I want you to know that I was up very late last night with a needle and thread trying to get ready for what I'm about to do. Hopefully this will work. So as you can see, we have a big curtain here, so hopefully that all goes okay. I want to start this story back with the beginning of lithography. It started with this gentleman, Alois Sennefelde. He was a guy who was born in Prague, which of course is now the Czech Republic, and if you're able to see, he was born in 1771. He went actually to Munich area, to Bavaria, to study, and this kind of hits close to home for me. I was a Fulbright professor at Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich, and so this is a little bit close to home for me. The institution that I was teaching at, he actually studied in. At that time, it was called the University of Ingolstadt. Anyway, he was there, and he was actually interested in writing plays. He was a playwright, but he was not a successful playwright. And one of his plays, Mathilde von Altenstein, didn't work out. And he wasn't able to get it published. So he did not have Kindle Direct Publishing at the time. But what he did have was a quarry between Munich and Nuremberg in a place called Solenhofen. Solenhofen, it's kind of hard to say, Solenhofen, which is a quarry of limestone. Again, I don't know if you're familiar with Bavaria, but between Munich and Nuremberg, of course, Nuremberg has a very, very dark past in the 20th century, but long time before that, it was the home of Albrecht Dürer. It has a beautiful castle there. But anyway, in between there was this, in Solenhofen was this quarry, and they quarried a certain kind of limestone. Now, this limestone has a very fine grain. And this is a kind of a raw, I'm going to try to point this out with this pointer. It has a kind of a raw, this is what the raw look of it is. Here is a piece that's been carved in a bas relief. And it's the grain though is very fine, so it allows for polishing to a very, very smooth surface. Okay, so this is a particular kind of limestone. Now, since that time, I should tell you, there are other places that have a limestone that does work for this, but for a very long time, and even now, the Solenhofen is considered to be the best of the limestone for this kind of printing. Well, what he figured out how to do, Zenefelde, was he figured out how to do what is now called planographic or planographic printing. Okay, so if you're going to make a print out of wood, you've got to carve that wood, and you roll the ink on it and you print it. If you're going to cut something out of linoleum, you've got to carve into it. Well, this was a totally different kind of printing. Keep in mind, he wanted to print his own stuff. In the end, he ended up printing other things, including musical scores. But what he found out was he could get kind of form plates, you might say, of these stones, slabs of these stone, as you can see there in a rectangular shape in this case, and polish the surfaces to this kind of cream or ivory color. Really, it's closer to a straight white, to be honest with you, and get that really smooth. And he found out there was a way that he could create an image on it, to draw an image on it, actually, in the same way that an artist would draw something on a piece of paper or paint on canvas. So instead of carving into something or creating maybe a raised effect, in this case, he's going to print on the surface. So that's why it's called planographic or planographic, because it's on that flat surface. Now, how he did this, and here's an example of this kind of a thing. You can see what this looks like inked up here. But how he did this is he had a material called, this stuff here, it is pronounced touche. Okay, now wait a minute, let me go back here. I got a little ahead of myself. Touche. Now, by the way, if you find yourself in this drawing exhibition over here, I was over there with Rachel earlier, and I actually, one of the things that I do I wear a lot of hats. I'm actually a fencer. I don't actually put fencing up, but I fence with a foil and a saber and an epee. And there's actually a drawing in the drawing exhibition that's on right now, and it's called epee. And it actually has a very correct depiction of a bout in which a person is performing a vault when the opponent is lunging. So just so you know, if you're there, it's a very, very nice drawing, and it's very correct to that style of fencing. But if one were to catch someone who's lunging and hit them in the wrist with a vault with an epee, somebody is liable to holler out, touche. So this is actually how this is pronounced, touche. So what this refers to is a kind of an oil-based crayon, I guess you would say, oil-based medium, sometimes made of animal fat. And this is what it was used. Zenefelde figured out that if he would draw on that limestone with this stuff, and you'll note that sometimes it's crayons and they come in different sizes now, and then they're brushes, so you can actually do kind of washes and so forth. But if you do that on that stone, okay, then you're going to create a situation of oil, basically creating an oil image. Now, the way that lithography works, this planographic process it works on the principle that oil and water don't mix. So this is how this works. So the way this would work out is that the artist will draw. The advantage of this thing is that the artist doesn't have to carve anything out. The artist is drawing or painting just as an artist would normally do. So you get all that nuance of a drawing and or a painting, and that's put on there, and then there's an etching that's done. Okay, now when I say etching, this is not a deep etch, okay? The way it works is there's a mixture of gum arabic and nitric acid, and they are brushed on or applied, we'll say, onto the image, and the oil, basically the oil is going to be, it's going to create a situation of sensitization. So I'll explain that in just a minute. But anyway, once this gum arabic and nitric acid is on, there's also water, and a chemical reaction takes place. Now, that chemical reaction, you can see this rubbed on here. By the way, once the chemical reaction takes place, and it's called an etching, once that happens, then this ink is rubbed off, and it leaves behind this kind of ghostly image. Sometimes this is called a moment of going gray. But what happens in this is what's called an oleomagnate of lime condition. So the dark areas where that ink is, that fatty, oily ink, those areas are sensitized, and the areas that are not inked are desensitized. This is sometimes called the absorbed gum layer. And what that means by sensitized is it's able to receive ink. Now, this isn't etching, but it's not something that has any kind of depth to it. The image lives in the top 1/64th of an inch of the stone. So it essentially creates a kind of reservoir where the ink can go into. Now that's the first etch. After that, then that's cleaned out, and then the stone has to rest. And then there's an inking. Ink is rolled on. It's a special lithography ink, again oil-based. Again, the oil is attracted to the oil. Water is also applied, and that, of course, repels the ink. This is inked on here, and usually there's a second etching. You do have to be careful not to burn, you might say too much of it. But anyway, once that second etching is done, then it's inked up and it is run through a press. And this would be a case of a lithography press here. This is an old-fashioned one. I don't know if where you're sitting, you can see this stone right here. So the stone will go underneath here. You kind of roll it under. Now, I'm going to jump forward. Let me say, this kind of process, because it's so intuitive for an artist who's already working in painting and drawing, it was a great process for translating, say, a painting into something that can have a print that can have that nuance. Now, of course, there are other prints and ways to do print. For example, Rembrandt got very involved in print, and he would work on copper and metal and do these sort of etchings. So it's not as if this is new, but this idea that you can start to do this kind of very nuanced thing and start to produce this began to give the opportunity for people to have artwork that is not maybe so expensive. Well, I'm going to leap forward in time. Let me say that from this process, and Sennefelder wrote, one or two books on the topic, and there were a number of people from Bavaria, from Austria, from the German-speaking part of the world, who then also began to immigrate to the United States, and they brought this know-how with them. And they came to certain cities, so you'll see printers in Philadelphia, Chicago, but one of the big centers is Cincinnati. Or as my little nephew says, Cincinnati. So so through the first part of the 1800s, there's a lot of this, and of course, you know about Currier and Ives lithography, everybody knows about. So, you think about the kind of black and white sort of work. But one of the things to help bring the cost down was another German-speaking gentleman, Georg Siegel, in 1851, took out patents in Austria and France, also German-speaking, for a steam printer. This is a picture of a steam printer. So this is kind of what they look like. So this part over here kind of rolls forward. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. Clearly, this thing is possessed, or I am. So anyway, but this is sort of what this looked, and so this roller here, it will go choo, 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 choo. So you can produce quite a few. I've read as many as 800 prints in a day, maybe more or fewer, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's kind of what those steam presses look like. And then there was another step taken, which is called chromolithography. So that means putting color into the lithography process. Now, the way this has to be done is that for each color, this is color separation. I know we got artists in here. So color separate. So basically, you know how I don't know actually if anybody does this anymore, but I'm pretty sure still with an inkjet printer, you've got to get the cyan and the yellow and and they mix it. Well, same idea. These were these early ideas, but what this means practically is for each color, you got to have a different stone. So that means a lot of prep work. This is a case, an artist, I don't know if people know this name, it's an Italian artist, Gabriele Castagnola. I don't know if anybody knows that name, but he did a lot of these really fabulous full-color lithographs. This one is particularly nice. You're not going to be able to see this from where you're sitting unless you're in the front row, but right here on the side, he actually puts the colors that he used. It's a little color strip, and it's quite a few of them, actually. It's several in there. As people began to do more of this work, they began to figure out that they could really bring the cost down and be more efficient by reducing to yellow, red, blue, the primary colors, and black. And by the way, the order typically did start with yellow because, especially for the posters we're going to be talking about in just a second, for the outdoor work, the opaque yellow, because it was the most opaque pigment basically they were using, they would start with yellow and then work their way through red and blue and then finally black. And by doing this, they could mix colors, obviously mixing the primary colors. Now, of course, the effect of this, if you've seen stone lithographs, they have a very grainy sort of look about them. And let me say, the achievement of that is quite interesting. So we'll say a little bit more about that, but that's kind of the effect of it. Well, Castagnola was one of many people who were doing very fine art types of prints. But, of course, we're not looking at the fine art. We're looking at really advertisements for carnivals and circuses, and primarily circuses. So I want to deal with a few French people whose names you're probably going to know. If you don't know the names, you're probably going to know some of their posters. We're going to begin with this guy, Jules Chéret, who was French. You can tell that he's French by the way he looks, of course. But anyway, 1836 to 1932. He actually studied lithography not in France, but in London. Now, if you look at those dates, 1859 to 1866, I know, Tracy, we're not supposed to talk about this century, but if you look at those dates and you think about when he goes back to Paris, 1871 is when the Paris Commune happens. So the Paris Commune is an uprising following essentially the loss of the Franco-Prussian War. It is a working class uprising primarily, and it's a watershed moment in Paris, and the government ends up kind of coming in, setting it down, and it starts up the next French Republic, but it also is the kickoff and is seen historically as being the kickoff to the period that you and I know as La Belle Époque, or the Golden Age of France. So this is the era in Paris when you have people such as Maurice Ravel, a composer, or Claude Debussy, or Eric Satie, or all of those composers, and also, of course, the great artists of the moment. So in this, but also in this time, what's interesting about that period, La Belle Époque, and why I want to focus on it, is it's this moment when high and low art really don't know how to disentangle. So the tout Paris, or the upper class of Paris, is all down into the slums, okay? They are down, with the prostitutes and the carnival, and there's a lot of movement there, and so a lot of the artists, Eric Satie, for example, I don't know if you know, I'm talking about the composer. He composed furniture music, and he had a pet lobster. He would walk around, and he had 7 suits that were all the same color. But anyway, he what's interesting about him is he actually spent a lot of his career playing in the Moulin Rouge. And so he was somebody who was really mixed that high and low art. And so the idea of the circus and the carnival was very fascinating to La Belle Époque. And this gentleman, Jules Chéret, started to produce some of these great posters. You've probably seen some of these with the Folies Bergère, of course, the very famous review, the forerunner to the Ziegfeld Follies here in the United States. He did this poster of, this is a lithograph, a stone lithograph of Loie Fuller, who was actually an American who did this dance, a butterfly dance. She had a sort of a big silky kind of thing she would move around. This is one of the Chéret works. And you'll notice, by the way, the mixing of the color. So you'll notice the color bands. Really pay attention to that. Try to think about lining up those stones so that they will print. A lot of times you'll see with a real stone lithograph, you'll see some misalignments sometimes. So how do they, it's interesting when you look at these posters, think about, I won't go into great detail about it, but think about the strategies that they have to use in order to make all of this come together. How do you orchestrate the color? This is especially important when we get to these some of the circus ones in America. But anyway, here's another work from Folies Bergère, and then I want to give you this one, which is a carnival work, Théâtre de l'Opéra Carnival. Now, carnival, of course, In Europe, this is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but if you think about in the Catholic-based backgrounds, particularly of a lot of the European countries and Western European countries, as far as the Catholic side of things with it, that, of course, was so much in control. There was in the, I don't know, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, all these centuries, there, of course, is Carnival. So if you go to Italy, for example, there's a whole print sort of connection there. So it's not carnival in the same sense that we have where you go out and get cotton candy and all that, but this idea of the carnivalesque, the idea that in La Belle Époque, the carnivalesque, the idea that what's on the bottom is down on the top and vice versa, everything kind of a tossed salad in a way. This is very much at work. And again, you can see the planning, here's a clown image, the maskers, and this sort of zigzag shape. Now you're going to see some of these shapes played out in some of the works that you see done for commercial purposes in the United States. I got to pay attention. We have only 4 hours left to go. So, all right, so this is Jules Chéret. Another name that probably does not need any introduction, I imagine, is probably Alphonse Mucha. Now, Mucha was from Prague. I don't think he was in Prague, but definitely Bohemia, also coming from that part of the world. But he made his way to France, and he's probably most famous for his posters of the actress Sarah Bernhardt. I'm sure you've seen some of these before. This is the first one that he did of her. It's actually not finished. He had actually planned to fill it in. If you think about some of those secession works by, not Sheila, but maybe some from Vienna, and you think about how they're so filled in here. This one is not. But anyway, this is the first of his posters. This is one from her performance in Tosca. These are all Sarah Bernhardt. Sarah Bernhardt, who, by the way, didn't bother to learn English. Mark Twain, y'all know about him, Mark Twain? He saw her perform, and she just performed in French, and everybody loved her anyway. In America, she did an American tour. But anyway, this is one of my favorites, a Moët and Chandon advertisement, and then this one, Monaco, Monte Carlo. This is like a magazine image. Anyway, you can see kind of how his approach is very, very small, kind of colors, kind of muted, intricate. Imagine trying to orchestrate these kinds of lithographs. But of course, we have to come to this gentleman, Toulouse-Lautrec. You don't need introduction with him either. They say, at least the latest count is that he is known to have produced 363 prints or posters. Again, he's working in the lithograph vein. This one is particularly nice because you have this gentleman, if you can see, there's the white Solenhofen limestone, and it's being run through. This is probably a piece of leather here. It's being run through the press. And then she's looking at a new piece here. By the way, the paper typically was pretty good. You had to have a lot of water involved in this, so the paper held up pretty well. Anyway, here are some of these very iconic works by Toulouse-Lautrec. A very different approach from Alphonse Mucha. So you have these big blocks of color here. They're almost closer to the old wood block style. But one of the things, too, that you get one of the interesting things, and I don't have an example to show you, but a lot of the letter, we'll say it like this, letter press, or where you have the letters set up for posters, are very rigid in their layout. They would have the letters, and then they would have an image, and then more letters, because they're kind of put like a printing press. Well, with this style of approaching a poster, you can do the lettering yourself. So you can see the lettering is done, and you can change the height very easily, change the layout, even change the orientation. So this will play a big role, again, in these big circus posters we're going to be looking at shortly. By the way, this is a poster of La Goulou. I don't know if you know who this is, La Goulou. I don't know where Alan Klein is sitting at the moment, but he may know the restaurant in Palm Beach called La Goulou. It means the glutton. And this lady, that was her stage name, La Goulou. She was a can-can dancer. I have a real soft spot in my heart for can-can dancers. Actually, one of my ancestors was a man named John Burwell Omohundro, and he married a lady named Giuseppina Morlacchi, who was the lady who's been credited for introducing the can-can to the United States. So I have a very special place in my heart for them. By the way, this gentleman in the foreground was a male can-can dancer. You might be surprised to hear that. Anyway, by the way, I did want to make sure, can you hear me okay? Oh, I'm so glad you're awake also. That's good. I do want to make sure you can hear me okay. This one is a poster of a lithograph of Aristide Bruant. Aristide Bruant, who was involved with a club called Le Chat Noir. You've probably seen posters of Le Chat Noir. It's a black cat. He also sang a song called Le Chat Noir, or the Black Cat. Anyway, again, the big kind of blocks of color, and he was known for this outfit particularly. And then this lady, Jane Avril, another can-can dancer. She was kind of known for very jittery kind of movements and so forth. But this is Toulouse-Lautrec. Now, he had a certain style that he did that he called crashi technique. And so I mentioned before that a stone lithograph, if you look at it, it has a very grainy look about it. The texture is smooth, but it looks very grainy. Not in a bad way, but in a good way. That gives it its richness. Well, he really leaned into it in this crashi technique. He would actually take a wire like grate and kind of flick. Some of you who are painters, you know, you can take a brush if you're painting, say, in watercolor, maybe, or oil paint, I guess. But I think a lot of watercolor painters will go and sort of flick pigment off of the brush, and it'll give that little splattered look. Same idea, except he was using a grate, but it created this kind of, he even leaned in even more to this grainy effect. I don't know if you can see it very well from where you're sitting, but there's a lot of splatter on here, and that's the crashi. By the way, this is an image of this lady, Cha U Kao. Cha U Kao, nobody knows her real name, but she was a clown in the middle of La Belle Époque. So you had a lot of people, even Suzanne Valadon, who became an artist. She was actually a model for Renoir at one point, became an artist herself. She had, at one point, had been a circus performer. So you see how the Carnival and the Circus really thread through La Belle Époque in France. Well, we can spend a lot more time on this, and I would love to spend more time with you on this. And if you have questions or comments or observations, I would love those later. But I want to mention just a couple of other things about France, and then I want to come over to the United States, where we have this really rich tradition of these kind of lithographs. This particular lithograph by Toulouse-Lautrec caused a particular stir. Now, let me tell you something, folks. During La Belle Époque, anything goes. Okay, you may remember that it was Cole Porter wrote the song, Anything Goes. Anything goes in La Belle Époque, okay? But even in La Belle Époque, when anything goes, this poster really kind of worried people. They thought that this was the idea that this kind of Judy Garland-looking lady and this guy would be kissing at the table was just a little too much, which I don't know how it could be, but apparently you're not supposed to put it in a poster. Well, anyway, people got upset about this poster, but there was a gentleman named Edmond Sagot. Edmond Sagot. Don't know if you know that name. Not as well known maybe, but he had an art gallery, and he said, wait a minute, there's some value in these posters. So Toulouse-Lautrec was painting these fine artworks. The posters are not seen, the lithographs are not seen as being fine art, but he began to get this was the first one, and then he began to get others, and he began to sell them and put them on display in his gallery and sell them as collector pieces. So Edmond Sagot is very important in the history of collecting lithographs. By the way, his brother's name was Clovis Sagot. You may know that name. He had a store, and he would buy early works by Pablo Picasso. When Picasso was nobody, and Picasso would come in and say, look, this was the last resort. He would go to his place and say, can you buy some of my paintings? He would say, sure, for $10 a piece. Picasso would go, he'd say, no way, I'm not going to sell it for that small a price. He would go away, starve another week, come back and say, okay, I give in, give me $10 for these. And Sagot would say, no, now they're $5. So that's Picasso. But he was the one who also had those pieces and began to sell them to Gertrude and Leo Stein in Paris, who were some of the very early people to collect those. Anyway, that was Edmond Sagot's brother. But now I want to sort of jump. We're going to move to the United States. You'll notice again, in this case, Prussia, Louis Prang. Don't know if anybody knows that name either, but Louis Prang or Louis Prang immigrated to Boston in 1850, but he brought his know-how, and I don't know if he brought the equipment or not, but he may have had to rebuild it, but he brought the know-how about lithography to the United States in the Boston area, and he started setting up stone lithographs. Now, again, by the time you get, we're talking 1850. So he's starting to, do the color work, and he's known these days as the father of the Christmas card. So if you see some early Christmas cards that look kind of like this, they will probably have signed on them, as this one does, Louis Prang. And those are stone lithographs. They were run off, multiple ones on the paper. And this was the kind of work he's doing. Very subtle, by the way. You'll notice kind of the work, kind of stippling work on it. Very soft kind of edges. So there's a certain subtlety, I guess you could say, about his work. Now, that's Louis Prang. Now, this brings us to some of the companies, and this really is the heart of what I want to talk about, and I hope you're still with me. So there are certain companies, and oddly enough, many of them are in the state of Ohio. Now, there are others, again, Philadelphia, Chicago, obviously New York is going to have them, but a lot of them are in Ohio, particularly Cincinnati. But in Cleveland, there was a company called the Otis Lithograph Company. I have not so far quite been able to pinpoint when they came into existence, but it seems that it was in the 1860s. We'll have some questions and answers afterwards, and if anybody knows, I would love to know for sure. They did some early circus work, but they also did, and again, I'm kind of being a little loose with things because in terms of the entertainment of the era, you had melodramatic performances that had these stone lithographs done for them. One of the big companies to do that, by the way, was the Enquirer, Enquirer, which was in Cincinnati. You also had magic posters. Now, this hits close to home for me. I grew up in a household with magic and a bunch of these posters. These posters of Grover George, who was from Zanesville, Ohio. And this one here is a huge poster. This poster would take up almost all of that wall right there. Now, the way this would work is that if he was coming to your town, you would have all these posters on the sides of building walls, barn walls, and so forth. This one is what's called a 24-sheet poster. Now, this is a lithograph, stone lithograph, and it is very beautiful. The color is very strong in it. But I want to take a moment to explain what in the United States became a standardized kind of thing for lithographs. And that is the idea of a sheet. So a sheet is 28 inches by 42 inches. That is the size, ladies and gentlemen, of that stone. Now, you could do a half sheet, 28 by 21, but generally, if you're going to get a poster, a circus poster or a magic poster, they're going to be anything from 1 sheet to 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 15, 16, 20, 24. Bless your heart, ma'am. You're doing a great job. So 24 is about as big as they get. Again, just to give you a sense of the scale, maybe it would be easier for you if you think about this screen, it would be about the size of this screen. So it's pretty big. So 3 levels of sheets and so forth. So this is kind of how this is done. So if you're interested in these kind of things, if you would like to get one for yourself, you'll find that you're going to have to address how many sheets the poster is. So that's how it goes. Now, Otis leaned into some more of the magician works. One of them was Howard Thurston, who was a contemporary. These are all contemporary of Harry Houdini. Charles Carter, known as Carter the Great, who was from Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Anyway, these are all in Cleveland. They did do some of these works that are more carnivalesque. So this is Hippodrome Opera Company. Again, a very large poster, bringing in all these figures. And so this is what's done. Now, I want to say, and this is another one, this is the Hagenbach-Wallace Circus. Now, Otis did do some Ringling Brothers. Now, you've surely noted from the name of this that we're going to wind up with that big combined show of Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. But they did some of the smaller circus pieces. This is a particularly nice one. A little bit blurry image as the best one I could get. Now, I want to say something about who was working there. So in these companies, you have multiple artists hired. And sometimes it's hard to figure out, they're not signed typically by one artist. And so they would work collaboratively. Think about it. You have to have somebody design each of these stones and so forth. One of the people who was working for Otis was this gentleman, William Summer. His dates, he was born in 1867, died in 1949. He was actually born in Detroit. So I wanted to mention somebody from this state of Michigan, Detroit. But he wound up in Cleveland working for this company, but he was also a modernist artist. So he has work in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Here are some of his more fine art works. He, some other fellows who worked also at Otis, who were artists, particularly William Millman, in 1911 created something called the Cocoon Arts Club. And here is a picture of the people. Every year they would have an annual ball. They had a kind of a clubhouse with all these kind of serious artworks. They were serious artists, fine artists, but they also worked for the Otis Company. Now, by the way, if you are familiar with the poet Hart Crane, who wrote the very long poem, The Bridge, he was very close friends with a lot of these people. He was from the Cleveland area. So I bring this up because the Cocoon Arts Club was a pretty bacchanalian group, modernist, late Belle Époque and early modernist crowd. Pretty interesting, kind of gives you some of the names, at least, if not all the faces behind some of these images. By the way, they ended up merging with the Morgan Lithograph Company in Cleveland. This happened, that company started in 1887, but they merged in the 1920s, and Morgan went on to be the printer of some of those Universal Studios monster posters. So The Mummy, Frankenstein, and some of those. So you can see sort of a line of descent. But there was also, going down to Cincinnati, because this is where it is, so you have several companies in Cincinnati, the Inquirer, Russell Morgan, and this one, the Donaldson Lithograph Company. Here's a picture of the facility where these were done. Donaldson Lithograph Company started in 1863. Give you a sort of an idea, this is for the Donaldson Fair. It's Newport, Kentucky, if you're familiar with the area. Right across the river from Cincinnati is the Newport, Kentucky. Notice how clean this image is, a very, very clean kind of an image, larger image, Donaldson lithograph. These are called stock lithographs. So it's the idea that you want a lithograph, but you can't afford to have multiple stones. By the way, I want you to do the math, because I can't do math. I found out all the way up to 8 times 6 is 98, and I gave up at that point. So, anyway, but imagine doing a 24-sheet poster, and you've got to do 4 stones for each sheet. So it's a lot of work. It's expensive. So you've got to be successful to do that. So a stock lithograph is for somebody who's starting out. Here are some of the Carnival and Circus ones that they offered. You'll notice it's blank up here. And that's where you could pay to have your own name sort of set up in letter and stamped onto those. So these are called stock lithographs. There are Carnival ones. These are magician ones. If you go to a place called Marshall, Michigan, there's an American Museum of Magic, and you can see some of these very ones with names printed up here. And some of those are more rare than some of the more famous posters. And then this one kind of is... This particular one, my dad has one of these, but you can see, again, stock lithographs for jugglers with different names on top. So that was something that Donaldson really was a stock in trade for them, was to do stock lithographs. But with that, we come to what has been called the Tiffany of posters, the Tiffany of printers and lithographers, and this is the Strobridge Lithographing Company, and this is the final one. This is it. This is the crescendo. You can probably hear trumpets sounding in the background. So the Strobridge Company, I want to tell you about it, and then again, we'll have some time for questions and comments. So this is the best picture I could get of the facility. It's kind of clipped. I couldn't find a better one at this point. But anyway, Strobridge Lithograph Company, it had a kind of a complicated background. Again, note, these are companies at this point. So Toulouse-Lautrec, he's designing these things kind of as a freelancer, and then he takes them to get printed and so forth. But and he works that out. These are companies, and this one has kind of a background that kind of had several machinations involved in its getting to the point of being called the Strobridge Company. Heinz Strobridge joined it, but it was in 1867 that it became incorporated with the name Strobridge, and it was on 171 Race Street in Cincinnati. Now, again, it's a collaborative process, as you've already figured out, but I want to talk a little bit more about that. What was involved? Well, you had 4 different types of artists. In other words, 4 specializations in terms of artists. So you had the design artist, first of all. who would maybe do who would do a concept drawing, but a lot of these have not survived, by the way. But he would do a concept drawing. I say he, it's many of these almost always were men. So I was talking to somebody earlier today who was talking about going into an industry in the 1960s and being the only woman in it, and it was a ceramic thing. So it's pretty much all men. But anyway, there would be design artists, would be the initial artist to do the design. Then you have this one, the black artist. This is not an African-American artist. It's a situation where for these circus posters and magic posters and so carnival posters, there would be one person who was responsible for doing the black outlines of the images. So there's a lot of subtlety in the images, but in the big circus posters, there's a black outline. They are very critical because they are part of what helps kind of line everything up. Anyway, the black artist, then you have the color artist. Now, let me tell you something. I have particular admiration for the color artists, okay, because they had to figure out how to find just the right amount of yellow and the correct amount to have red to make orange. They had to figure out exactly what the spread and intensity of that would be. It is quite a thing to see how they do that. So the color artists, and finally, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear, they had specialists who did lettering. Now, keep in mind, as you may know, when you're doing this kind of printing, the lettering has to be done in reverse. So it has to be backwards. It's a mirror image. Like when you print it, you have to do the lettering backwards. So imagine trying to get the lettering right, but you got to do it backwards. So you have these 4 different kinds of artists. Now, some of the ones who worked for Strobridge, their names are known. Probably the most famous and long-lasting one of them was this gentleman, Henry Alexander, or he's usually called Harry Ogden. There was also Matt Morgan, this gentleman, Paul Jones, and then this gentleman, Harry Birdwell. His middle name was Loud. I would like to think that that was really the name that his parents gave him as a middle name when he was 2 years old. But I don't know about that. I have 2 very dear nephews, and I found out that their lungs are very strong even before they're 2 years old. So anyway, but these are 4, there are quite a few, but these are some of the most best known of the design artists, kind of behind the scenes, Wizard of Oz like there. And here's one of their advertisements from 1896, the foremost lithographic poster establishment of the United States. And you can see they're printing all over the world at that point. Bicycle posters, show cards, catalog covers, or anything else lithographic. So that's what they were doing. So what were they doing? So this is one of the carnivalesque scenes. This is actually Coney Island. And this one was put to a number of different effects. Look at all the figures and the colors. Again, start doing the math. It's a 24 sheet, big, probably about the size of this screen is what this would look like. Incidentally, a lot of these did not survive. I'll say more about that in just a second. But these days, if they are surviving, they're often mounted on a linen background. So Strobridge Lithographing Company doing this very big Coney Island kind of carnivalesque thing. They did do a number of very famous magic posters. This one, self-decapitation. I must tell you that growing up in the household of a magician, I have had my head cut off a few times and put back on. But I, to this day, have never figured out how to do self-decapitation. So if I figure that one out, I will make sure and come back. Probably not in one piece. Anyway, this is Howard Thurston, and he's Keller's successor. So Keller, very influential magician. In fact, he was very influential and good friends with this gentleman, Harry Houdini. And this very, very famous Houdini poster of the water torture was actually printed by the Strobridge Company. So these are very, very high. So everybody knows Houdini, okay? It's funny. You can ask anybody, name one magician. They may or may not know David Copperfield. They all know Houdini every time. So these are very iconic in their own time. Keller and Thurston, also very, very, very iconic. Then there were a number of these works, again, kind of borderline circus, carnival, acrobatic works. This is the Frederick Gloss and Levan, champion ladder performers of the world. Don't know how many people you've seen perform on a ladder. I have always just thought of them as something that either brings bad luck or that I hope I'll be able to see through. But anyway, this is a kind of an interesting one, a situation of conjoined twins. This is called the Batchelder and Doris Great Inter-Ocean Show. So it's called the largest and best show on earth. Of course, they had not figured out that the big show was coming. But anyway, this is a situation. They were actually people of color. They were African-American conjoined twins. There's a whole interesting background in terms of freakery, as the term would have been used at the time, and print in the 1800s. And then there are some of these, in our time, probably not much remembered circuses. Paul and Sells Brothers. They were out of the state of Ohio, and this was kind of a case. Of course, at that time you had animals performing in the circuses, and no longer the case, of course. But they do have some of the classic clown images and the ballet type of work. There's another Paul and Sells Brothers, more clown oriented. This is again a combined show kind of deal. And then this one, Paul. This one I particularly like because it gives you that Loie Fuller look, doing that butterfly dance. And it has a very kind of nice Belle Époque, this is from 1910, Belle Époque kind of look about it. But I want to mention one other thing. I mentioned about the paper being pretty good quality. Believe it or not, these, even though, okay, so let me stop just a second before we show the big posters. Again, I'm paying attention to the time. I want to tell you this. A lot of these posters, the way they would work is they had an advance crew that would come. These were traveling circuses, carnivals. They would come to your town, and they had a group in this crew that would bring, and here's some language. This is important for you to know in case you're ever playing Jeopardy, that if you have 150 to 200 lithographs, that's called a HOD, H-O-D. And if in the number of posters that you have put up on a barn, such as in this picture, or on a fence, is called a daub. So they would put those posters up. They were actually papered to the walls. They were not supposed to last more than 2 weeks. They were not taken down. The weather would the rain and everything would tear them down. That's why very few of these exist still in any kind of good shape. Despite the fact that they're not supposed to last long, however, the paper quality was really, really good. And if you do have one that was never actually put on the wall, it's in great shape typically. A lot of it was done in West Virginia by the Pulp and Paper Company of West Virginia. Okay, so with that, I want to go to this because this, of course, are the big posters that Strobridge did, and the most famous of the posters by Strobridge, the Barnum and Bailey Greatest Show on Earth, and ultimately the combined shows. This is a 1917 poster, very iconic poster. It's been done in a couple of ways, including a reverse where the clown is turned in reverse. But anyway, this is, of course, the big top, the big gigantic clown. This is the Strobridge Lithograph Company. Again, you'll note, see the black, I don't know if you can see from where you're sitting, see the very strong black outlines all around, the black outline of the clown and all this. And yet you get all this little nice detail down here. Imagine trying to coordinate the color. Not easy. So imagine trying to coordinate the color. So this is 1917. There's this one. I know this one scares everybody to death. This one was actually done by Charles Livingston Bull, who was an expert, a la his last name, on animal anatomy, particularly tigers. He made only one change, which is he put the dew claws right here to make the tiger look even more fearsome. Now, of course, I know this image can be disturbing, animals being used in the circus in the past, but this, again, is one of the very iconic in 1915 combined show, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey poster. Very effective. And interestingly, kind of the idea of the animal is kind of dangerous. This is another super iconic graphic one from the 1920s, specifically 1927. Again, the combined show, the greatest, so-called greatest show on earth. They would do these big parades, and this is a case of a sort of a chariot race type of effect. Again, notice the big swath of brown. And then this one, believe it or not, is late. It's from the 1930s, 1938. So you think about some of those movies, King Kong and some of that. So they had this gargantua who, as you can see, is very bloodthirsty and has this girl in his hands. He is, in fact, the world's most terrifying living creature. So anyway, this is 1938, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey combined shows. And then these are all the most iconic, again, this one with the horses, 1920s. I haven't been able to figure out exactly the year that this one was first used. Again, all done, again, you'll note the very strong use of the colors. They would go back and forth, but the red lettering with the black outlining tended to be pretty big. I wanted to show you this one because I just think it's done in 1918. You know, you think about that moment, the Great War coming to a close, and for that season, you get this idea of the clowns. I don't know who all's afraid of clowns. If you are, I'm so sorry that I've had to show this to you. My dad, again, when I was growing up, our walls were filled with these stone lithographs, including clown ones. My dad apparently was terrified of clowns as a kid, and he decided that he didn't want his son to be, so he filled my walls with clown posters. I found out that when the dusk is falling and the blue gloaming has descended upon the earth, that if you stare at a clown poster long enough, the mouths will start to twitch. I'm just saying, try it sometime. Anyway, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey combined shows. And then, of course, this one, I have to show you. I'm sure people have seen this one. Very famous, of Lillian Lietzel. Lillian Lietzel, in case you don't know who she is, was an aerialist. She was famous for going on one hand up very high in the tent, and she would do one-armed planges, where she would hold to the rope and she would hurl her body over itself. She would dislocate her shoulder every time, and she would do them over and over again while the audience counted. She was known to have done as many as 100 at a time. Eventually, she developed a terrible, it wasn't great for her shoulder, but she also developed an infection in her wrist where the rope was tied around. She actually was doing one of these. She was on the rings one time in Germany later on in the 1930s. And she was married to a gentleman named Alfredo Cadona. And Alfredo Cadona was very famous aerialist, a trapeze artist. He would do the triple turn. And one night, her rigging was not done correctly, and it broke, and she plunged head first to the ground. Her head shattered like an eggshell, and she was taken off and died shortly thereafter. And it was a very terrible story. But anyway, this poster, this lithograph from 1920 features Miss, as she was called at the time, Dani Miss Lietzel. I kind of want to stop with her because she, in all of these lithographs, all these male artists, but she was actually the highest paid circus performer of all. She had her own special tent. She had her own people waiting on her. She was a big, big deal. But this is a very iconic poster. You've probably seen it before. Again, done by the Strobridge Lithograph Company in stone lithograph. Bless you. Stone lithograph. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you very much for your wonderful time and attention. You all have been just wonderful. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.